it's so nice to see you again virtually. You're on Music and Chat with Shueh-li Ong, and yes, I am back in Singapore. So it's a good morning from me to you. In Singapore, it's a little after 9:30. We had planned, or I had planned, a yay or okay session with two of our special friends, Philip Nelson and Lee Stringer. But unfortunately, Philip Nelson has had something else that is needing to occupy his time urgently. So we have instead Lee Stringer all to ourselves. And I have decided we'll do a music and chat with Lee instead. We have lots to talk about. He shared with me briefly what one of his recent projects was, and I thought it'd be really interesting to dwell further into the special effects side of filmmaking and moving images, etc., etc. I've been saying etc., etc. a lot lately, and I don't know why, but just seems very convenient. Fill in the blanks. All right, so without further ado, I shall bring Lee in. But just before I say, please, if you're watching, let us know in the live chat and tell us where you're tuning in from and your name so we may address you appropriately. And if you have any questions, of course, put those in the live chat so I may address them as the stream moves along. Thank you so much for your patience. So let's have Lee. Lee's already there. Hey, Lee.
Good morning. And it is morning because I'm also in Singapore, so it's there's no time zones to figure out this time.
No, it's so good to see you, Lee, even though it's virtually. We really should meet for like another local meal or something in Singapore. The only time I see Lee is once a year or something. Maybe
Yeah,
twice
yeah.
a year if
That's,
we're lucky. In
down in
person,
Katong
that is.
somewhere. Yes. Yeah.
So
So
Lee, we've had two music and chat interviews with you already in the
we
last
have.
few years during the pandemic to talk about your various projects that have been so exciting and quite fantastic for the imagination to try and fathom and then go, and you let out a sigh of wow at the end, if you know what I'm saying. That's the way I react, at least, when something is truly fascinating to me. All I can do is just look and listen, and then I finish off with wow. So, Lee, you mentioned that you worked on a recent project. Uh,
Yeah, it's been a bit weird for the last, well, obviously the last 3 or 4 years with COVID and whatever, and then post COVID things were just getting going again.
yeah.
In the film and television industry, and things were just starting to get back to some sort of normality, and now everything's ground to a halt again with the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes that are on right now. So that's pretty much. So yeah, I'm currently in a on hold, as a lot of people are, waiting to find out what's going to be when that's going to restart. But I
Yeah.
did manage to get in a couple of projects. Between the end of the pandemic and because I did actually work on two projects during the pandemic, which I think we spoke about on our last call, and so I've only really had a chance to work on a couple of smaller projects. So one was a very small project, and it's interesting. I forget the right words. The contrast between in the industry, because I worked on a large, U.S. sci-fi TV show, Star Trek, and a little independent Vietnamese film called Inside the Yellow Cocoon. It's only a very small VFX job. Wasn't and apart from one shot, it's all invisible in that you won't even see any of the shots. And I actually, while I like doing big spaceship shots or period shots or whatever environment shots, all the big wow shots, I actually really enjoy doing what we call invisible visual effects. And invisible visual effects is used far, far more than most people even realize because they're invisible. because
So when you
yeah.
say invisible, please define that term for us so that we realize that it is visible, but it's more like it's not it's an element that you shouldn't be aware of, but it just happens to be there that creates the
Yeah,
atmosphere or something like that.
well, it's sometimes the atmosphere, sometimes the time period, sometimes just
Oh,
the location, even.
oh,
So we're
okay.
invisible VFX. So in this particular project, we were just adding rain to to some shots. So specifically, one really long shot, which was just which is also very unusual for visual effects because most visual effects shots are sometimes less than a second.
Yeah.
Average 2 to 5 seconds is a pretty typical shot, but most are very very quick. A lot of action shots and things like that. This one was I think almost over a minute and a half, I believe, which is very very long. Um, and it's basically it was just adding rain. So you're kind of like, okay, well, what's the big deal about adding rain? Well, as I say, it's an invisible effect because rain doesn't show up very clearly on the camera. So when you're looking at rain, you can see it totally. And a good example, just take your cell phone out and go take a picture when it's raining, and you'll be kind of like, where's the rain? It doesn't really register very well on a camera. There's various reasons, but mainly because it's clear.
Mm.
The water is clear. So you can actually set up lighting specifically. Often, if you're in a situation where you're filming fake rain, meaning that the special effects people are making it rain, they've got sprinklers set up and they're making it rain, you will often put an extra light in or two lights in or whatever off to the side just to light the rain up. You're literally blasting a light in from the side, which is not on
Mm.
the actors and it's not on the background. It's
Mm.
just being shone on the rain so that you can see it, so that you can see the rain. But even then, it's surprising how it doesn't show up. So I've done several projects where we've had to add rain into the background just to, and sometimes it's also just for consistency, which is another thing
Oh.
where invisible VFX is done. So another place where invisible VFX is used a lot is for continuity between shots. So you might do a scene and it might have been shot over, it could be shot over a day, it could be shot over several days, and obviously things change sometimes. Usually, the main thing we're working on a lot is the sky. Now that's my ceiling, but
Oh.
imagine it's the sky. So clouds move. The sun moves, and if you're out on location, shadows move and things like that. So often we'll have to go in and change the sky behind somebody, not necessarily, sometimes it's for artistic or directorial, all the clouds don't look pretty, let's make them look prettier, which is quite common actually, making skies look really, look nice. Um,
Okay.
but often it's actually more for continuity, so that when you cut from one shot, so we have to add clouds in to match the clouds from the earlier take. So it's the same with rain, things like
Mm.
rain. You might have the camera set up in one position, but then when you move the camera to another position, you don't see it. And obviously, if you're cutting back and forward between shots, in this particular show with the Vietnamese one, it was just one long take. But often you're cutting between, say, two people having a conversation, and you're cutting from one side to the other side. And on one side, you might see the rain might be showing up on the camera, and the other side it might not. And so we have to add it into the match.
So when you
So
do continuing scenes, do you do a cut and match situation, or do you actually generate with via computer? So it's fake, but it simulates the previous scene. If you know what I'm saying.
yeah, do you mean if it's like a long shot, do we cut it up, or if it's a back and forward? Um,
Either or.
so
Are there
yeah,
differences?
well, yeah. Actually, the longer shots can be a bit of a pain because
Mm.
um, you know, generating very long sequences and then having to render out those sequences and then compile those sequences together,
Mm.
make a pre-check it, and then output it, and then send it, and then have the director look at it and give you notes and whatever.
Mm.
Um, it can be, it's kind of like, when you make when you edit a video together, where you got to render it all out and put it up, and nowadays it's getting kind of quick, but sometimes it can be, it can take a little bit longer. So the longer shots are a little bit more of a hassle. In fact, up until I'm trying to think. I remember doing a long shot about 10, 15 years ago, and we literally couldn't do it because the software wasn't set up to handle like over a minute because it wasn't editing software, it was compositing software, and it literally couldn't handle anything over a minute. So we had to actually cut the shot into two. And the problem always there is that when you cut a shot into two and you put them together, you'd think that they would just blend together. And if you've got one little setting that's just slightly off on the first clip and it's slightly different on the second clip, they don't match up. So yeah.
So you do take
yeah.
parts of the previous film that you want to exist in the next bit of
sometimes
footage.
Yeah, or sometimes well, one thing we often do in visual effects is we'll have a VFX editor who's actually an editor that's on our side, as it were, and what they're doing is they're actually cutting our stuff together with the stuff that we're not working on, perhaps. And then so that we can check to make sure, again, it's all about consistency and continuity across what we're doing, whether it's for continuity or to make sure that we don't see the blend, or we don't see the transition, or whatever it is. Or if we're cutting from a shot with rain to a shot that needs extra rain and we're adding extra rain, we want to make sure that as they chop together, because when you look at a shot on its own, it might be fine, but when you put it with the other shots, you need to make sure that there's a consistency across them.
So is rain generally created? Because I can't imagine how easy it would be to take existing rain footage and removing everything else but the
actually
rain.
Yeah, well, with rain generates its own, and as I say, it's very interesting with something like that, because rain is such a simple thing. It's just water, really, and everybody knows what it looks like, and it's very basic. But it does sort of come in different ways, different types, as it were, which is kind of odd. But when we're faking rain, there's actually multiple different ways of doing it, and the other thing with rain and with water is that with natural elements, so hair, if you're animating somebody's hair, that was hair and fur and feathers, that used to always be like a really big problem. Nowadays, it's less of a problem. With computing power now, it's got pretty good, and the software's got very good. So when somebody says they want to do like hair and feather and fur and stuff like that, 20 years ago, people would just shudder and even 15 years ago, it was kind of like, 10 years ago, it was like, okay. Now it's sort of like, not a big deal. It's not, it is a big deal. It does take a lot of work, but it's not a scary thing. But things like fire and water, again, natural elements, they still take a lot of work. And so rain is just a simple version of water. So sometimes we will actually sometimes have real elements. So, I mean, I do have libraries of rain on a blue screen, where it is actually real rain that's, because also once you introduce wind, is it just falling? Is it, how heavy it is and stuff like that. But we often do some simulation. So we will actually do some computer generated rain that might get put in. And then, the interesting one actually is things like raindrops when they're hitting stuff. So, for example, in this Vietnamese project, they did actually have rain there. It just didn't show up well enough on camera. But it was a street, and so obviously on the street you can see puddles of water on the street. And they had it was at night, so they had vehicles moving around, and so where the rain is actually hitting puddles of water, you're going to get the little rings that that pop out. And interestingly, actually, that there is software now that you literally kind of go, okay, over here I want to have some rain, and you actually get software, in the software, in the compositing software, it actually has a little basically make rain puddles,
Oh, wow.
thing. Yeah, and even the I remember years ago we did a film where we actually had like raindrop. It was basically an actor. This was a different project, but the actors are in front of camera and it's raining behind, and they had lit the rain so you could see the rain. It was fine, but of course they don't want the rain on the actor.
Yeah.
They might have spritzed. They get like a water spritz and they put it on the actor so that they look like they've got some rain. But they don't want the rain continuously on the actor because obviously after about 10 minutes it's not fun anymore. So the actor is
No.
not going to be in the rain, but they're in. And sometimes they'll occasionally off camera they'll spritz a little bit overhead. Mainly just so that you can. But what we were having to do was to sort of add like little on the shoulders, little blip, 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 just an occasional little
Oh,
splash
yeah.
on the shoulders. And then I remember we had some sort of like on their face. So you'd see like a little water droplet would just kind of run down their face just every so often, just to make sure, make it look like they were in the rain. And as I say, this is invisible VFX. This is stuff where you look at it, you would have no clue that any work was done on it. But
Yeah.
sometimes, and they're fun shots to do. So it's a combination. It can be real stuff. It can be simulation. It can be sort of fake rain. Um, and then there's a lot of sort of playing around to blend it in and make sure it looks real.
So I can only assume that to uh, computer generate rain, that would be more costly than for them to restage it and throw like a rain spout
Well,
and film it. And
yes, and I mean, obviously, it's better to kind of get it on camera on the set on the day, but sometimes that's just not possible, or it just, as I say, it's often continuity. But it's not the hardest thing to do. As I say, rain's pretty simple. It's not a big explosion or a waterfall or something like that. When you're getting into into the heavy fluid simulations and stuff like that, they can get pretty. That's where stuff gets really complicated. Even still today, that's complicated stuff. But
mm,
but no, it's interesting just talking about something as simple as rain. But the thing I like about it, as I say, is it's not so much the simplicity of the rain; it's the invisibility of, because a lot of people
you kind of take it
kind of
for
go, oh, that.
granted.
Well, and also people are so jaded these days, with films with a lot of visual effects, and they just kind of go, oh, they're watching the Marvel films or the newer Star Wars films or whatever, and there's just a massive amount of visual effects, and they become a
Mm,
little bit kind of like, oh, I don't know what's real, I don't know what's fake, oh, that doesn't, and then they kind of go, wait, that can't be real, that doesn't look, and it does take people a little bit out of film sometimes,
mm,
and it's kind of weird because it's like people want that in their films, but then they complain about it.
mm.
So they kind of go, "Oh, that looks fake, but give me more."
Do you
So
think
yeah.
it's just one of those everyone's a critic situation?
Oh yeah. Oh, very, very. Oh, all the time. I mean, yeah, yeah. um, you know, yeah. I've had a lot of people go, "Oh, that looks so fake," and I go, "Okay, show me what you did. Show me your version of it." And they're like, "Oh, well, yeah, but I'm just kind of, I'm like, well, it's like that's fine. You can tell me it looks fake, but show me your show me your better version of it. I'd be quite happy to look at it."
Do you
So,
have something that you learned on the job that you could share that's about invisible effects? That
ooh,
something that you went into thinking you knew everything that you had to do because you'd done this before, but you figured something out on the job that
right.
actually yielded better results or made it happen in a shorter time or changed the way
Well,
you looked at it or
right, right. Well, I kind of got into this. Well, I got interested in this kind of field when things were still more practical and were done with models and miniatures and puppets and whatever. And then things got heavily into CGI. And then um, I guess one of the main things I don't want to say discovered, but I certainly try to use as much as possible is using as much practical as you can.
Explain.
And when I say,
Ah.
so that you can then build on top of it. So, if you've got, like we did a project a couple of years ago where we had, just a simple example. There was this creature. Okay, so they had hired a place in Australia called Odd Studio, one of the best makeup effects places in the world, and they made brilliant prosthetics. It was looked very, very convincing, looked really real. And they had a great actor who was performing on it. But what it was this guy was sort of like a half. It was sort of like a creature from the Black Lagoon type of thing, where it's like a half fish, half human thing. And so he had this like huge. His eyes, were bigger, because fish have these, big eyes, as it were, to see underwater. And so the thing is that there was no way that they could actually have those eyes move in the prosthetics, because how would you have these balls, like this big, and so it needed to be kind of close to his face. So so what we did there was that we filmed it as it was, and then we went in and just replaced. All we literally did was to replace the eyeball and then move it so that he could look around. And it was very, very subtle. When you look at the shots, you almost don't even. And as I say, it's not quite an invisible effect, because obviously there is. You know that it's it's a fish man. It's not real.
But then you
But
expect the eyeballs to move as well.
yeah,
Otherwise, it wouldn't be
because
real. Yeah.
exactly. If you look at somebody and they're like, they're just sort of moving around. Hi, how are you? I'm here. It looks really weird, I mean, because obviously you're so used to looking at, here. It's
Yeah.
like, if there's bits, like my fat under here is not moving, or my ears are not moving, you wouldn't necessarily notice
Kind
that,
of disregard that. Well, yeah, but
because you're
eyeballs.
not really, you're not
Yeah.
really. But if it's anything kind of in the mouth, the nose, the eyes, the brow, it you kind of notice it. And the makeup was great because it allowed the mouth to move and it allowed the brows to move. The only thing that didn't move, there was no eyelid.
Oh,
And fish don't have eyelids anyway.
no.
They don't blink. So we had that. I've done that. We've done that before, where we put a blinking eyelid in there and stuff like that. But so all we had to do was just the eye. And the great thing about it was that because it was 99% real and it was shot on set and whatever, we had, it looked convincing. The actor was doing his performance, and all we did was to just have that little, by the eye, just sort of just did little subtle movements. And because we had a real, there was a fake eye in the prosthetics, we could sort of see how the light hit it and how the reflection was and how that little because eyes have an interesting property where the light kind of goes
There's a
in and
little,
comes out.
yeah. There's the glint,
Was
isn't it?
yes, exactly. And when a lot of people talk about when stuff looks fake, or they know that something's like a puppet or something, it's often that little thing in the eye that you just know subconsciously it doesn't look right. And so because we had a real prosthetic on set, it gave us that reference, and then we could replace it, and we could track it. So it's very, very subtle, and that's something that was kind of a planned one ahead of time. We had sort of planned that one. But one of the other things that I've done, or like to, again, using stuff on set, using stuff practical, using stuff that's real, is had another show where we had this guy was doing like a magic thing, and stuff was levitating behind him. There was things floating, behind. And normally what you would do in those situations is you would make CGI models of those things, and then you would put them in the scene and you would add them in afterwards. Well, the thing is that, if I got my mouse here or whatever, I mean, this is not a complicated model to make or whatever, but it still takes, a day or two to model this, and if it could be more, if it's something, and then to texture it and to light and make it look good. Well, now if you've got 20 objects floating in the background, suddenly you've got, a month of work to do. And then it can add up. It can add up quite quickly. So what we ended up doing was we filmed the scene, and And then what we did was we brought in I can't remember if it was a blue screen or a green screen. Doesn't really matter too much to us. And then what we did is we actually had all the objects, and we just kind of rigged them with some fishing line, the monofilament, as we call it, the clear. And in some of the cases, like with something like this remote, we just sort of slid the battery compartment open, put a little bit of monofilament in it, closed it up, and then it kind of hung like this, And then we basically I literally over the top just twisted with my fingers, and so this kind of piece just rotated around like this, and then we just sort of filmed it for a minute or so, at different speeds, going backwards, going forwards, and things like this. And then we did the same thing with a whole bunch of different things where we just sort of had them but all they were doing was just doing, we did them at like an angle, and then they just, I'll try and do it, we just sort of had them at an angle like this, and they just kind of rotated like this. Now, this is black, so it doesn't really show up that well, but you get the idea, right? And so we had all the, and then what we could do is we could take this element that was just kind of rotating like this, and then we put it in the background, and we just kind of have it go like this, and just kind of float around, and then kind of go down. But because it was kind of just sort of slowly turning like this, and it kind of floated around a bit and then went down. But because it was the real object and it was in the same lighting as the scene was already shot in, it was really, really quick and really easy for us to just take that element, pop it in. We could do a little bit of secondary animation of it kind of floating around, and all we had to do then is do a little roto here on the person's shoulder just to cut it out so it went behind them. And that's something that, again, you can do that on, we did a little bit of prep for that, but not a huge amount. But, within, it probably took us, 10, 15 minutes to make these elements. So, instead of it taking a month to make it in CGI and animate it and blah, 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 we were done in 15 minutes, and then obviously we had a few days of compositing, but that would have been there whether it was a practical element or a CG element. So it's, part of my job now is kind of trying to figure out those things. And sometimes they're really simple. Sometimes they're more complicated. Sometimes they need a lot of planning ahead, but sometimes you just kind of do it on the spur of the moment. Like, oh, okay, we'll just do this, on set. I know I kind of rabbled on a bit there, but...
Oh, no, that's very useful, because I was going to ask you that same question. So you then decide, based on the budget and time frame and practicality, like what is just ridiculous. You want to spend a whole month rendering objects, or you just want...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And sometimes they do, and sometimes it's required. Sometimes, you have to do that for kind of for want of a better word, a director safety, in that sometimes they don't actually know what they want when they're shooting stuff, or they don't know what the final look's going to be. So you kind of go, well, okay, we're going to have to make all this stuff, and then we'll figure out the shots afterwards. But hopefully, you've got stuff planned out beforehand, and you don't have to be so, fixing stuff afterwards. The old visual effects term is we fix it in post, which we can, but it can get expensive. And everybody's looking at budgets these days, and you kind of go, well, let's try and do it practically. We'll try and do it on set, and it both makes it look more real. It's more interesting to do, but also when it boils down to it, the idea is to save money when it really boils down to it.
What's the most interesting one that you worked on? One that you're very proud of because it came out really great and even better than you imagined it would. And it was something that wasn't just an invisible effect, but made a big deal to the scene.
Ooh, okay. That's a tough one.
You have a few seconds to think about it while I cook the viewers. Viewers, if you have any questions for Lee, please put them in the live chat. The routine now. And don't be shy in letting us know where you're tuning in from. Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Gary and Mike, for being here. Gary's in from Eugene, Mike. You can tell that I still got jet lag on my mind, and this morning's trying to reroute the whole programming. That took a bit of my intelligence away. But Mike Brand, a good friend of mine, he's tuning in from Eugene, Oregon, and Gary Mayula, another good friend who is also music and chats archivist. Thanks, Gary, for being here. Gary was doing the test with us early this morning. Lee, have you thought of something?
I'm
Should
trying
I
to think of
should I
something that's
continue to ramble?
interesting, and
I could ramble on a bit more.
I'm trying to think of something that's that's kind of like interesting or whatever. Um, there's many examples I can think of, but the one that's coming to mind is it's not actually the most interesting shot, but it's the most it's for me it's sort of more interesting, and that was nearly 20. That was 25 years ago.
Ah,
Was when I had got hired to work on Star Trek Voyager, and it was basically the very first shot. Now I'd worked on smaller shows and I'd done commercials and I'd done little movies, independent movies and stuff like that before, but not a big, primetime TV kind of show. So it was the first shot that I had done that was on in an episode. So it's like you go from watching the episodes as a fan or as a sci-fi fan or as a Star Trek fan or just watching an episode, and then you're watching the episode waiting for your shot to come on. Now I'd done in this particular episode, which was the first Star Trek show that I worked on. I must have done 10 or 15 shots, maybe more, in the actual shot. But there was a little sequence that I had done with 3 or 4 shots altogether. And of course, I'd spent several weeks, working on these shots. And as I say, most, something about the rain shot. I mean, most VFX shots are less than a second or 2 to 3 seconds as an average. And so it's very rare. And these shots were like that. They were only a couple of seconds, whatever. But when you're working on them, you're looking at them over and over, and you're kind of tweaking them or whatever. And so you were looking at them in the sequence, and you're kind of concentrating on the shots, specifically. Yeah. And but when you then see it, when you're sort of just watching on your couch, just watching an episode, you're kind of like, okay, here it comes, and then it's just like, and it's gone. And because it's gone within a few seconds. I mean, it's literally gone within a few seconds, and it's just interesting because it's something you've been looking at for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then it's on air. It's there forever now. But it was the thing that it was all over within 2 seconds, 3 seconds, or whatever it was. It's just, and you kind of go, oh, and this was back in the late 90s, so this was before we had DVRs and before we could pause TV and go back, and you're watching it live. You're watching it live. You're watching it once, and it's gone. It's done. That's it. And you're like, oh, that was it. That was 2 weeks of my life. Just.
I was going to say, did you wonder, should I have just spent a week and a half? Or I didn't really need to spend 2 weeks after all. They didn't even see that extra detail that I spent so much time on.
Right. Yeah. And that is a question that comes up quite often, because one of the problems with digital VFX that we have nowadays is that you do have a lot of time to tweak stuff. You do have time often to adjust stuff, and you can adjust stuff. So one of the things that I sort of have learned a long time ago, but still have to remember it and whatever, is that when you're previewing something, like I was saying, I worked on this for several weeks or whatever, and you're looking at something over and over and over and over, and you're looking to see, is this correct? Is that, could this be different? Could this be better? Could this be whatever? Yeah. And then you'll obviously, we have a visual effects editor sometimes on a project that will then put them together, and you want to kind of look at the stuff. So what you really always want to be doing is to look at stuff in a sequence, in the playing it through. Because then, if you're looking at something that's on repeat, you can see something. You'll always find something that's wrong with it. But if you put it, we always now try to make sure we put stuff in sequence so that we can kind of look at it in context with the whole sequence, the whole scene. And do we, we might have seen a little thing that was a little bit off, but do we see that when we're watching the whole scene? Because we're watching this, we're watching this, we're watching this, and then my bit goes thump, like this, and you go, oh, did we see that little, that bit right there? Did we? And when it goes like this, we don't see it, you know. So that's something that you know, I've definitely learned to make sure that when we're doing reviews, is to try and make sure that you're looking at a review in a sequence, as opposed to an individual shot that you're just looping over and over and over. Because when you're looping it over and over and over, you're gonna find something wrong. Or you're gonna, you know. And then nowadays you can pause it and go back. Okay, frame by frame. Okay, that little bit right there, that's not quite right.
So do you have to be concerned about that? That now we are in the digital world, and we have been for a long, long time. That people viewers might pause it and start to criticize your work, or at least you might pause it and start criticizing.
Oh no, they do. Yeah, it's more of a problem if you're in a genre show or in a popular genre show. So I've been lucky that I've worked on things like Battlestar and Star Trek and Star Wars, and so you've got the Star Trek and Star Wars, of course, are the biggest, and they've got the most fans and they've got the most popularity and whatever. And those fans are very critical of every single. It doesn't matter whether it's somebody's uniform, if it's the makeup, if it's the writing, if it's the music. They will criticize or not criticize, critique every little bit. Yes, critique. Get the right. Everybody's got an opinion, but and a lot, to be honest, a lot of it I sometimes I agree with. Sometimes I do it myself. I've definitely critiqued plenty of things. But of course, but they will literally go through frame by frame, checking. Is that looking for something, or and they may not be necessarily looking for a fault. They may be like, oh, I want to check out this shot of this explosion and see how it looks, and then they might go, oh wait, there's a mistake over here, which now, as I say, with everything being digital, you can do that.
Along with everything being digital, we have all these forums. Do you ever go through the forums and read what people, fans of particular project you worked on are talking about?
Right. Less than I used to. But I do, like, on Facebook or whatever. I do belong to quite a few of the sort of the fan groups, because I do occasionally like to sort of see what people are talking about or whatever. But and occasionally somebody will put something about something that I might have been involved with or whatever. And normally it's more that I can kind of go, oh yeah, we did blah 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 blah. And then I get asked 100 questions, because they're like, oh, you worked on that. Oh, I'm going to ask you this question now. I'm going to ask you this question now. So, but not as much as I used to. And it's not that I'm, because you always read these things where, an actor or director or whatever goes, oh, I never read reviews. I never read the paper and check the reviews or whatever, and they do. They do, of course, You mainly want to, you just want to make sure that people are actually, what are people talking about? So, yes, I do, but not as much as, not too much. I tend to sort of float around the edge and have a look and see what people are saying, and then, yeah. So,
have you ever gained any useful comments or critiques?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, because people do find stuff that, the thing is that, you could have 100 people working on something and a mistake, gets through. I mean, there's been a couple of classic ones the last few years, not stuff I've worked on, but, there's the famous Starbucks cup, in Game of Thrones.
Oh, yeah.
Where,
that made the rounds.
And you've got, yeah, I mean, you're like, how could that possibly happen? How does that get left behind, and somebody, wait, but the great thing is, of course, now, they can literally go, oh, quick, send that shot over to somebody in effects. Okay, paint it out. Okay, put it back on. And the great thing now, of course, when you find something silly like that, is that you can literally upload a new version of the show onto HBO's, server or streaming server or whatever, and it's fixed. Now of course that some people are like, no, that should be there because that was the original. Well, it's like there's a difference between changing it and fixing an obvious error. But it does also bring up the fact that how many editors, how many post-production people, how many the producers, the directors, or whatever, how many people were watching that and didn't see it. It is, but it's also what I was talking about, with the face when we were doing, if something down here is not necessarily moving, or your ears are not moving correctly, but your eyelid is not, you'll notice this, but you won't notice this because you are, and that happens with whole shots, whether there's effects or anything in it at all. I mean, you're as part of sort of directing is that you're leading the eye, you're leading the audience to be like, okay, look over here. And whether you're doing it consciously or subconsciously, that's something that we also have to think about, is that where you're when you're storytelling, and whether you're visual effects is part of the storytelling, you're having to lead the audience to where they're going to go next, and so that does often. That you're kind of like, well, the focus is over here. These people are talking. We should be looking over here, and we should be listening to what they're saying. We shouldn't be worried about the Starbucks cup that's over here because nobody's looking at that. But as I say, the genre fans are very
attentive,
observant. Yes, attentive. Yes. And for good or for bad, yeah. So, I mean, we did. I remember, I can't remember what it was, but we put in, like, we needed some sort of alien text, like on a display, like, some communication thing or whatever. And it wasn't anything part of the story. It was just some text was scrolling across the bottom of the screen or whatever. And we'd, well, anyway, we put in a message. I can't remember I don't remember what the message was. It wasn't something obscene or whatever, but it was just like, hey, to anybody who's reading this, why are you doing this, or something like that. We just put in some random text. We just type in the text. I honestly can't remember which project it was or which language it was that we used. But we found, there are these sort of fonts online that you can download. If you want Klingon, you can just type something in Klingon and it will come up in Klingon. It's not going to be actual Klingon. It's just the words, the letters translated into symbols. Anyway, somebody, talk about being on forum, somebody actually translated it and put it onto a forum and made a comment about this. And it makes you realize, you go, oh, wow, people really do look at like every little bit sometimes.
Do you think they're looking for Easter eggs? Like,
I think they are, and that's exactly because Easter egg. We do put in Easter eggs, of course. We do them sometimes on purpose. I put in Easter eggs, occasionally. Yeah. And that's something that has, it's like finding the Easter eggs.
What's been an interesting Easter egg that you have created?
Ooh, well, the usual one that I put in is my birthday. Which is also my son. My son was born on the same birthday as me. Not year, but the same day of the month. Yeah.
That would have been an interesting visual effect.
Right. So it's a time traveler's conundrum. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And how do you manifest this Easter egg?
Well, it's February 23rd, so it's 2/23. And so one of the things I like to do is to hide 2/23 just as a number somewhere. And I won't necessarily say where I put it, but I do that. That's one of the things I do. That's kind of my personal Easter egg as well, where I will I will put in a 2/23 somewhere.
So it could be like a locker number or
it could be the. Exactly, it could be the serial number on a spaceship, or it could, It's not usually done like to be blatant or to be whatever, but So, for example, again going back to the Star Trek Voyager, there was a shot that I did where we pushed in on the captain in her window having a cup of coffee, so we got the whole ship We come right in on her face, and the all the like the hatches and the stuff, you know, on the outside of the ship, they have like little numbers all over them. And there's one right by the window. When we're coming in, we get really close and you can actually see the numbers. And so I changed the number on the hatch that is right close to the window to be 223, just for the, you know, so that as you're kind of pushing in, you just, and again, you don't notice it. You're not looking at it. You're looking at her. Nobody cares, you know. But it's just that. So those are my personal Easter eggs I usually put in. So
Okay.
some
like
of the other ones.
It's kind of like someone visiting a fairground attraction or something and carving their initials on the.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly, yeah. So you know, but it also, you know, it also gives you the you know, if somebody's like, you know, how do I know you worked on that? I go, well, my birthday's this, and I put that in as a little Easter egg, and they go, okay, maybe. Right. But yeah, it's just my personal Easter egg. Yeah.
So have you had to be a bit more conscious about putting random text in random languages in case it gets translated and it made meaningful sense to someone and it propagates, and next thing you know, there's another storyline that didn't exist before just because you thought, I'll just plonk these innocuous symbols here. That will suffice. We filled up that area, and lo and behold.
Yeah, you just have to make sure you don't put anything like offensive or anything that, you know, that's gonna, you know, somebody's name or some, you know, well, sometimes we put people's names in just for fun, or we'll put in a code name for somebody or whatever, you know, but yeah, you just have to make sure that it's kind of kept, you know, subtle and light. But you do, yeah, and especially nowadays, because, you know, now everything is 4K resolution, you know, which is 4 times high def, you know, and high def was 4 times standard def, you know. So the thing is that nowadays you can see everything, you know, whether it's a mark on somebody's skin, or it's a bug, a spider crawling across the ceiling behind somebody. I mean, you can, you know, with that clarity and that resolution, you can see everything. So you know, you've got to be sometimes a little bit more cautious with your Easter eggs, because they can be seen sometimes. So, you know, it's like on there's a shot in Battlestar Galactica where I put the Enterprise from Star Trek in the background, in the fleet, and I kept it. You know, it was really small. We kept it way in the background. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't very wasn't distracting or wasn't obvious or whatever. And that took, you know, it actually took. I remember when somebody finally posted on a forum, you know, like, hey, is this the Enterprise in the background? And it was several years. It was quite a few years after, you know, it had been on before I saw that somebody had spotted it, you know, with you know, and that was a high definition. So, you know, you could see a little thing, you know, back here, whereas now it's 4 times that. It's got to be even smaller in the background, you know, to be able to hide it there. Because you can, you know, as I say, you can see everything, you know.
So that wasn't a deliberate choice. It was just needing a placement kind of choice.
No, that one was a deliberate one. I purposely put that in. I put that one in on purpose, just as an Easter egg, you know.
Oh, okay.
You know, but it was done way, you know, it was way in the background, and you know, with a bunch of other stuff. It wasn't like, oh, here it is, you know, coming by. It was way in the background and way subtle and whatever, and just one shot where it was just there, and I was just, you know, but yeah, with the high resolution, with the clearer clarity, you got to be careful about what you put in.
So they really study every frame almost.
Well, excuse me. Sometimes, yes, people do, yeah. Well, that the, you know, fans are fans, fans of sci-fi, fans of, you know, of genre shows, whether it's, you know, Game of Thrones or Star Trek or Star Wars or something. You know, they you know, and it, you know, it keeps us on our toes to make sure that we, you know, try and hide something without it being obvious.
So, what's a VFX you might have worked on that is not invisible related, as in natural element, but something that is um, that require your creativity, come up with something new?
Oh, um, so something that I've done that is uh, not invisible, but still had to be creative.
Yeah.
Ooh. Ooh. See, this is the people know that this is actually live, and I haven't prepped for this beforehand because I got to
Yes.
think.
Everybody, that's why I'm not showing pictures or video or things like that, because it's all a spur of the moment. We were supposed to do a
Yes.
yay or okay game with Lee and Philip, but Philip had to bow out
Yes.
last minute, and Lee was kind enough and generous enough to say, yes, I'm agreeable to doing a music and chat. So there a few pauses, which is fine because it allows the viewers to think about questions they might have. So viewers, if you have questions, please put them in the live chat. I'm also unprepared, so I don't have my usual list of questions all ready to go. So, but I am curious at the spectrum or the range of VFX projects that Lee has worked on. So he talked about invisible effects, which I never really considered. I mean, it makes sense, but and it seems to make sense to us, and most of us will think, yeah, that's not a big deal, but it is a big deal because there's realism involved here for an invisible effects. The expectations we have, such as the glint in the eye that Lee brought up. We expect to see something that we take for granted, but if we don't
Yeah.
see it, we suddenly realize
Yeah. I mean,
that something is wrong there.
yeah. I mean, nowadays you got to remember or realize that even a TV show, a streaming show, a movie, or whatever that is not, a genre show, not a traditional VFX show, has VFX in it. And it can be a comedy, it can be a whatever.
Oh,
Um,
do you have
there's
a
visual.
couple of examples that you could describe to us, quote and describe to us? Because it's hard to
um,
imagine that a sitcom or that kind
well,
of TV program or movie theater. Sorry, a movie
yeah, yeah,
might
yeah.
require VFX.
Well,
In what
yeah. I
situations would
mean,
that be?
again, I'm going to have to go back into that and try and remember something, but I can kind of make up something or an example of. So
Yes, please.
it can be simple things like that you can see maybe a defect in the set. So for
Oh,
example, you remember that a lot of sets are say it's a sitcom or something. A lot of those sets, they are permanent, but a lot of them they might pack them up and then unpack them. Like you've got a particular
oh, yeah,
location. Oh, they go to the pizza shop. Okay, well they only go to the pizza shop 3 times a season or whatever. So
yeah.
the pizza shop set has to get packed away and put into a box and then brought back out again. Oh, we're going back to the pizza shop.
Yeah.
And so, obviously they will check and whatever. But as I say, one of the problems with the going to the higher resolutions, the clarity, the clearance, you can see. And so yeah, I've done stuff before where they might the set decorators might have come in and we've put the set back together, but we've got to get some paint and we'll just touch up that bit over there and we'll make sure it looks all good. And obviously they're looking very carefully at all this sort of stuff, but
Mm.
sometimes afterwards. And so yeah, I've done stuff where we've had to fix like a join, where the set or the paint, or you can see the paint marks. You literally can sometimes see literally the brush marks,
Oh,
in the background or something. And especially if you've got sort of, because I hate to break it to you, but a lot of stuff is fake. It's not real. Um,
yeah.
it's
I've
all
been on
fake.
film sets
Yeah.
before where from afar you go, isn't that just beautiful? Those flowers look so fresh,
Right.
and the whatever,
And
and
then
then
they're
you
fake.
walk up
Yep.
and oh,
Yep.
it's all fake.
Flowers, yeah, we've done flowers where they've had silk flowers and they look beautiful.
Mm.
And then somebody hands somebody a flower and it's like, right here, right in front, and you go, oh, that doesn't look so real right there anymore. You realize it's a silk flower and we've had to replace it. So again, that's the sort of thing where, you wouldn't even think of that, and sometimes you don't even notice it or think of it on set, and then when you're working on stuff, you kind of go, oh wait, we need to, no, that's not going to work. We've got to fix that one. Makeup. You know, an example I remember reading about back in the earlier 90s. I can't remember which year it was. It was just not something I was involved with, but I remember reading a magazine article, and it was a movie with Bruce Willis. And it was when he was starting to get, the bald, the monks, they call it the monk's bald patch at the back, the head. He was not, and I remember reading an article about this because there was a shot where he was being filmed from above. Oh. And you could start to see his hair was starting to thin at the back. And this was back in I think it was the mid 90s or early 90s when CG was still sort of new for doing those sort of fixes. They were talking about how they actually had to go in and do some paint work, some actual fixing to cover over the fact that he was got a little bit of receding hair, or reducing hair. And again, this is not something you might have even thought about. They probably didn't even realize it until they shot it all, and then they're looking at it and going, "Oh wait, you can see that his hair is starting to get thin." Of course, he's the leading man, and he's the main, the main attraction. And they're going, "Oh, we can't show that his hair is starting to fall out," So again, that's another example where you wouldn't even think about it at the time, and it would have nothing to do. It's nothing to do with the story. It's got nothing to do with the show or anything like that. And again, like what I was saying earlier about sky, replacing skies or replacing environments. So, and then the other thing that's being done a lot, is removing stuff or adding stuff into the background that, especially if you're doing anything that's sort of a period piece, and a period piece now is like anything from more than 20 years ago sometimes. Normally you think of period pieces, you're thinking of Victorian or the Wild West. Yeah. Now it's like, oh, we're in the 80s. It's a period piece.
Great.
Like, oh no.
Makes us feel real old.
Yeah. So it's quite often for removing a building. Maybe they've put up a new building that wasn't there back in the 70s or whatever, or a common one actually are cell phone towers. We have cell phone towers all over the place now, and obviously they didn't have those 20, 30 years ago. So even something that's relatively, not even necessarily that old, you need to tweak and remove, or it could be that you're doing a thing where there's a building that has been updated or has been knocked down and you want to put it back in to set a period. That happens quite a lot actually with New York, because a lot of productions are filmed in New York. It's quite a popular spot, but New York is one of those cities that's constantly evolving and changing. Kind of like Singapore here, downtown Singapore is constantly, it's very much like New York. So, I was bidding on a shot earlier this year, not a shot, a film that was set in New York in the 70s. And New York in the 70s is dramatically different than how New York looks. And I'm not talking about just like the World Trade Center. I'm talking about just the whole kind of look of New York. It's amazing. A lot of things have changed. Times Square looks completely different, And so there's a lot of invisible stuff like that has, as I say, it's not even necessarily anything to do with the story. It's nothing to do with the genre. It's just that it needs to be addressed.
So for our sci-fi fans out there, do you have an anecdote of an interesting VFX for a sci-fi project or sci-fi fantasy project?
Ooh. See, now I'm going to think of something. An anecdote. As in, Have you got something you can think of, or are you thinking of something that I can comment on, or something similar that I can?
How about some of the projects you worked on?
Right. You mean? I'm trying to think of a good example without it repeating or anything like that. right now. I'm trying to think of something that would be that other people might have seen or have noticed or whatever. We've already talked about Easter eggs. Give me a moment. Give me a moment. Sorry, I'm still thinking. Yes.
Well, because we're familiar with your time with Ron Thornton,
Yes.
anything there that rings a bell, so to speak, that might remind you of something you have done that we could hear about? Or after that, I know you
Right.
worked on Firefly.
Yeah.
Anything
Yeah.
there that...
Oh, there's lots of stuff from Firefly. The interesting. Okay, so the interesting for me with Firefly was that most of the people that worked on Firefly, VFX side of things, we had come from Star Trek, and now and Star Trek, for good or for bad, in the period from Next Gen, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, or whatever, it was. I don't want to say it was restrictive. It wasn't restrictive, but it was like there was a sort of a style, a look, that it had, because they were done as syndicated TV shows. So they're syndicated in that they could be run in repeats out of order, and so things didn't. Nowadays most episodic stuff has moved over to a linear, like a storyline, where your season has this story arc from one, and you don't have like individual episodes where everything is self-contained so much within that one episode. It's more like a big movie now, a lot of stuff.
I see.
Whereas Trek in the 80s, 90s, 2000s was all very much self-contained. So they had a particular sort of way of doing things. They had a particular system that was down, and I was kind of the new guy coming along in the late 90s. So it was a little bit weird for me there, because I would be like, hey, I've got an idea to do so-and-so, because I'm the new kid, I'm like full of energy and eager. And they'd be like, oh, no, we can't do that, because that would then be different than what we've done in the 100 episodes that we've already made, and we can't make a change. They literally, and at the time I didn't understand it. Now I understand it kind of better, because they needed that sort of consistency, So when, as I say, most of us who worked on Firefly, we kind of moved on to this new show, where it was a brand new show. It was being created, and it wasn't as big of a machine as it was on Star Trek. Star Trek was a big machine, that was making these episodes, and so we were kind of like let loose. We were kind of given, there was no rules, there was no restrictions, there was no thing, we didn't have to conform to anything. We didn't have any continuity that we had to stick to. We could just, hey, let's have fun and do whatever we, literally could do what we wanted. Not necessarily, not completely, but I mean, but it was. So one of the things that was interesting with that was that we could suggest ideas, we could suggest, or do sort of just, we could talk directly with the creators, because we were sort of part of the process, and it also allowed us to go down on set. Like when I worked on Star Trek, we went down to set a couple of times, but once was after after the end of the season, between in the summer hiatus, and all the lights were switched off and everything was covered in plastic, and it was kind of it was like we were looking around just to, and there was another time we went down where where they were actually filmed. It was very, very. It was not a normal thing for us, because we were just kept off in a corner at a different facility.
The scenes.
We're literally behind the scenes. We are way behind the scenes. Whereas on Firefly, we were sort of part of it. So we could go down. It was like So the first few times we went was mainly actually to take reference photos and just to have a look around, and just because we needed to build digital versions of some of the stuff, and so we went down, and also we were only a few miles away from Fox where it was filmed, so that was kind of so it was very both eye-opening and kind of rewarding, in that we were we were let off the leash, as it were, and kind of given a little bit, you know. And I think some of that shows up on screen because we were giving a little bit more. But it was cool, you know, it was great to be able to go down, you know, and it wasn't so much about like, oh, I got to meet Nathan Fillion or whatever, you know, which is great because he's a very good guy. He really is. He's very genuine. Him and actually all of the, and that was the, you know, all of the cast on that show are as genuine as they appear. And I think that was one of the things that made the cast of that really work and really gel together, because they liked each other as well. They got on instantly, and you could tell. And you could feel that when you're there. You could see that.
Do you recall something that you had latitude to work on and that we might spot if we watched it?
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff, you know, obviously on Firefly, but I just remember, you know, some of the there's a famous shot, or became famous with the fans in the first episode when Alan Tudyk's character he's got these two toy dinosaurs, and he's on the bridge of the ship, and he's waiting. They're off doing some hijinks, and he's kind of bored. And so he's doing this little scene with these two plastic dinosaurs on the bridge, because he's sort of waiting, you know, he's bored, he's waiting for something to happen or whatever, you know. So he's doing this little scene with these two dinosaurs. It's become like a fan favorite scene, you know. It's something that gets quoted a lot. I've seen T-shirts with, you know, with these plastic dinosaurs made in with the quote written above it, and, you know, it just happened that we were on set that day, and they actually, you know, the sets on Firefly were built very much as they appear on the show, in that they're laid out like a spaceship, and so we're all crammed in this little set of the bridge, you know, with all the crew and the camera, you know, obviously the camera view, the director's there, and you know, and we're these kind of VFX guys who are kind of like, shit, you know, should we be here? We're not really meant, this is not a VFX shot, we shouldn't really be here, but we were like, what the hell? So we managed to kind of like hide in the back, you know, which, when I say it's the back, it means we were like probably two people behind the camera, because we were in this little tiny, you know, it was a little tiny set. It wasn't particularly big, you know, and it just happened to be that scene, you know, where they were filming, and we'd read the script, you know. This was the pilot episode, and we'd read the script, and so we, you know, we kind of we knew the, you know, but it's one of those things. It's like there's a big difference between when you read a line on a script and then when an actor performs it, and then when they perform it and it kind of becomes iconic for the show. And it was weird because I remember I think I was there with Jared Davis, who's called J-Rod. He worked at Newtek for quite a long time afterwards. Remember, you know, we were just at the back and we watched this scene being filmed, and then we kind of looked at each other and went, that's interesting. And we both had this kind of thought in our head, I'm pretty sure, of it was like the first time we kind of got an idea of how this show was going to be. Because you kind of, when you read the script, you kind of have, you know, it's like reading a book. You have your own version in your head of what you feel, and then you see, you know, somebody actually sort of performing it on stage or on a set or whatever, and then you've now got their version of how it is. But because we're so behind the scenes, usually we don't, at that time, this was 20 plus years ago, it didn't get to be on set very often, and it was kind of cool to just sort of see this, give a, you know, this line in the script that didn't really pay any attention to, and then you sort of see it and you go, oh, interesting. You're suddenly getting a feel of like the character. You're suddenly going, it goes from being a line on a script to being a character, or being a, you know, saying this line, you know. And he's quite goofy, of course, you know, and it's a comedic moment in a sort of a semi-serious show. And then you kind of go, this is going to be an interesting show to work on, because suddenly it becomes, you're going, because, you know, suddenly you're with these characters as opposed to lines on a script or concept art on a page or something like that. It's suddenly becoming a bit more real. And then it became this, as I say, it became one of the more famous the fans just really gravitated towards. He's a great character, of course. Wash is a great character, but the fans kind of gravitated towards certain of his lines, and that was one. And I was just like, yeah, we were standing there when they filmed that, and it was kind of, sort of,
Do
like.
you recall having to work on like a blooper? Have you ever been called to work on a blooper that couldn't be fixed any other way?
Oh, that's a good one. Not so much. No, I can't think of working on a blooper per se, because usually what happens when a blooper happens is that then they'll do another take.
Yeah.
Because usually when a blooper happens, you're kind of like, now, but also on Firefly, it wasn't a blooper, but I was with Jared, and they were doing some pickups. So the show had been picked up, but the pilot episode, the Fox wanted them to make a new action sequence for the beginning. Oh. They wanted to beef up the pilot and make the opening a little bit more action-oriented. So they had this whole sequence that was a flashback, and it was a battle scene out, and they filmed it out in the desert, about an hour outside of Los Angeles, up towards Palmdale. And so it's this big kind of, we got to go drive up there, and it was a night shoot. So we were there all night. We were like literally an overnight shoot. I can't remember if it was on Friday, I don't think we had to go to work. I think it was a Friday night. We didn't have to go to work the next day. So we finished work and we just drove, we drove up there. And we get up there, and of course, and again, we were still fairly new to being on set or whatever, but we get there and there's 200 extras all in their soldier outfits, and there's tanks and there's vehicles or whatever, and there's this gun, so you're kind of like, wow, this is a real set. Okay, this is cool, Yeah. And so then there was a bit where there was some VFX stuff where there was these fighters were going to come in, they were going to blow up this gun.
Yeah.
So Mal, the main character, is shooting this gun at this spaceship. He shoots down the fighter, and then that vehicle crashes into the gun where he is. Basically, he shoots it down, and then it shoots him down.
Oh, God.
So he's shooting this gun, and they had this real 50 cal. It was actually a World War II gun that they kind of dressed up to look a little sci-fi-ish. Okay. But it was, but it was a real one firing blanks or whatever, and of course it's loud and whatever. Big, yeah. And then obviously they did a shot where he dives out the way, and then we were going to, and then they do a shot where they did a huge explosion, massive explosion. Then we were going to combine all those elements together to make the sequence. So, they were like, okay, we've got it all rigged for this big explosion. Okay, everybody back off a bit. Everybody back off. So of course, you all back off a little bit, and you back off a little bit. And, and the safety guy, he's, they're checking to make sure nobody's, going to be, close. We didn't realize how big of so it wasn't really a blooper, but it was a blooper for us because it was a big explosion. And we were probably, I forget how far, I'm going to guess we were at least 100 feet away, so a good 30 meters away. But, and we were, behind the cameras and everything else. But this explosion goes off. And I remember specifically, we were just like, whoa. And then I remember specifically having to literally turn 180 degrees around and kind of bend over because it was, it was like I could feel this heat on my face. Yeah. And we were like, wow, that was a really, really massive explosion. And then hopefully, well, J-Rod knows this, and his wife now knows this, but J-Rod turns to me afterwards and he goes, that was better than my wedding. Because it was just boom, it was just massive. It was like, and I was like, and so, yeah, that's kind of gone down in infamy with but so that wasn't necessarily a blooper, but it was kind of, because it was a one, they weren't going to redo that on it, but it was a blooper for us because we were like, wow.
It was something you didn't expect.
No, it was it was something we definitely didn't expect.
Did that scene require any other fixing up, or you just needed
not
to
the actual explosion? No. Well, even the explosion actually, it did have VFX in it because we had to have the spaceship coming in, going, you know. I think Kevin Quattro did those shots. I can't remember exactly. I think they weren't my. I did the shots with the gun. I did some shots with the gun where it was firing at the, but I didn't at the fighter as it was coming in. And there's an Easter egg there, which is well known now, but I won't. You know, you can look it up online. There's an Easter egg in that with the gun firing that I put in, but it has been found by the fans.
Oh, okay.
It's a little bit. It wasn't obvious, but again, it was but the actual one where it hit and blew up, I didn't do that particular shot. But yeah, so there was a reason we were there. We were there for, you know, we didn't need to be there, but we did. It was a fun night.
So I have one last question for you, and
Okay.
it's about Easter eggs again, because I'm always curious about Easter eggs. But I do want to encourage our viewers to post any questions they have in the live chat. I'm just reading some of the comments now.
Oh, okay. I can't see the comments, so I'll look at them afterwards.
And our Music and Chat archivist, Gary, reminded me that this is actually your 4th appearance on Music and Chat. I didn't realize that. I thought it was the 3rd. So he congratulated you. You're the first to appear 4 times. That's the applause. Here we go.
Yeah. So it's probably just because I'm in Singapore, so it's easy to do a hookup. So
thanks, Lee.
Yeah.
So
okay. So yeah, fire away.
One last. It's about Easter eggs. Any other Easter eggs besides your birthday? Now we know your birth date.
Right.
We'll all have to remember to wish you happy birthday on the 23rd of February, everyone. Any other meaningful Easter eggs that you've planted or that you're aware of that is VFX related, I guess?
Well, there's one that's actually animation that springs to mind, which is an animated one, which is more unusual because in animation we don't put in so many Easter eggs. Because
I know this sounds like a stupid question. Why not?
Well, normally, to be honest, time and trying to figure out, you know, we do put Easter eggs in and certainly have. But when you're doing so I flip-flop between VFX and animated content. And so when you're doing an animated, you know, a series, say an animated series, I mean, each episode is going to have between 300 and 500 shots. Okay, because obviously in live action, not every single shot is a VFX shot, whereas in animation, everything is a VFX is a shot.
Okay.
So you've got 300 to 500 shots, and then you're potentially making 20, 30 or more episodes per season. So if you multiply 20 or 30 by 300 or 500, you're getting into thousands and thousands, sometimes tens of thousands. You can you know, an episodic season can easily go over 10,000 shots. So it requires an awful lot of you spend a lot of time just keeping track of and coordinating and just, you know, just so. To be honest, you end up spending, you know, you've got to keep, you know, thousands of shots in your head and keep track of thousands of shots, and you don't have time to think up jokes. So many, you know, you don't have as many, you know, as much time to think up stuff. Yeah. Because you're just trying to crank through stuff. Anyway, when I was working on Star Wars: The Clone Wars, which was in Singapore here, one of the lighting supervisor, who's based in California, named Joel, he's an avid photographer. And so he literally would have a camera around his neck all the time. And so he'd come over and visit every so often, and he would always have a camera. He's an amazing photographer. And his favorite camera is a Leica, which is a very expensive. And Leica is very known because it has a red logo, little red. So whenever you see a Leica camera, you'll see this like little red button on the front that has Leica written on it. And so in one of the episodes of the Clone Wars, and I don't remember exactly which episode, it would have been, I think, season 3. It's when they're going to Mandalore, which is now even more well known because of the Mandalorian TV show. But So they go to Mandalore, and the sort of the queen of Mandalore, or the queen, I think Sabine. Anyway, she's arriving, and there's like there's like crowds of well-wishers or whatever, and she's kind of traveling along. And there's this one shot where you kind of go along a bunch of people, and they're all like, "Yay!" and they're all cheering or whatever. And there's one character that's like looking and goes, "Click," like this with a like holds up a camera and takes a photo. And so I was like, I kind of put in a request because again, with an animated show, especially a big animated show like Star Wars, there's procedures and whatever. So I put in a thing and I said, I want to make a Star Wars version of a Leica camera. So we actually made a sci-fi camera that had because it's sci-fi, it has to have like 3 lenses or whatever, or whatever. But and I haven't looked at this shot in a long time, so I'd have to pull it up and find it out. But anyway, we purposely put a little red dot thing right here next to the lenses, and we looked at the Leica cameras, and we made kind of a sci-fi Star Warsy version of a Leica camera. And then so that was when this guy's like cheering, we had this one guy kind of like he takes a photo of her as she's going by, and that was kind of like a little Easter egg for both him and also for the Leica camera. It wasn't like it was endorsed by it doesn't say Leica or anything on it. It's just literally a silver camera with a little red dot, but it's like, so if you know what a Leica camera is,
But the fact that the look or the appearance or the profile of a Leica camera is well known, did Leica jump in?
I don't think they were ever told or ever knew, or because it is kind of subtle, but it's there, but it's subtle. It's, as I say, it doesn't scream that it is. But
it would be more like an homage then, rather than
exactly. Yeah, no, it wasn't like a product placement. As I say, we but it was the fact that we had to specifically model this little prop that was only used for that one shot, basically.
Wow.
I don't know if it was ever used in any other time. So and another Easter egg that I tried to get through, but we didn't actually end up getting it in, was when they, and this was again on Clone Wars. So when they made the prequel movies, there's what's called the Senate, which is this thing where there's a podium in the middle, and there's all these there's hundreds and hundreds of these kind of pods around with all the representatives of all the different planets.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually put an Easter egg in the movie with E.T. the extraterrestrial.
Really?
So if you look up, so George Lucas actually put in, because obviously he's big friends with Steven Spielberg, and in one of the shots of the Senate, there's one of these pods down in the corner, and there's 3 aliens in there that look just like E.T. Because he's got a very distinctive, build with the bigger head and the flat head, and so it's really obvious. And that's been an Easter egg that people did pick up on, whatever. And I was actually trying to get when we did the Clone Wars, because we did quite a lot of shots in the Senate. I was trying to get us to model a digital ET to put in one of the pods as well as kind of our Easter egg of an Easter egg. So that one never actually happened, but yeah. So anyway, I can't remember which episode it was particularly, but it was Sabine arriving at Mandalore, and there's a crowd of well-wishers, and there's a guy with a camera that was, and that's actually a kind of rare one where that's basically kind of like putting a crew member into an episode as well. We didn't specifically model the character to resemble the person, but the idea was that was.
It's kind of like a caricature almost of the person, because that's how he always appears to you. So if you see this character,
exactly,
you go, oh, that's probably so and so.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So anyway,
Any more questions? Anyone? If not, I'm gonna let Lee go. I guess not. Everyone's stunned by what they heard.
no, still
Thanks,
asleep.
Lee, so much for this impromptu chat. But I
Yep.
learned a lot as well, so I really appreciate it. I really enjoy the behind the scenes, and I think most people don't realize what behind the scenes really implies or requires. And a lot of things we take for granted because we expect it then we don't realize, such as the invisible effects. Rain, for example, would be an element that you would computer generate, but most people would consider putting a
Yeah,
sprinkler
you just don't think
system.
about it.
Yeah, you think, well, they just use
Yeah.
the sprinkler system, not realizing you need continuity or that kind of thing,
Yep.
things to match up, or maybe
Yep.
even dramatized, as you're saying, putting lights against from the back so that you could actually see droplets more clearly, because you are highlighting the droplets
The
rather than
rain.
just
Yeah.
letting fall down. And the nature of droplets is such that it is practically invisible to the eye unless you have lights on it.
Yep.
If it's nighttime and there are no lights, you don't see. So that, it's quite interesting that a lot of people don't consider that,
Yeah.
and helps them appreciate the work that is involved in having to support that scene with VFX, what needs to go through, how I think the thought processes is also as important, and also is an intriguing aspect of having to supervise VFX. Your brain, you are having to make a lot of decisions, and the decisions rely on a lot of experience and knowledge, for the right experience and knowledge to be selected and then brought together so that what you think will work actually works, and no extra money
Hopefully,
is
yes.
wasted, no extra time is wasted. So
Yeah.
thanks, Lee. I hope to get Philip available soon so we can play Yay or Okay with you. But I need to catch up with you in person too while I'm in Singapore. So let us know when you're available. And we'll do that. And we'll find a different place to have something else, a different meal, different local meal. Okay, so I'm going to play the outro now, everyone. And Lee, you stay that, and I'll say goodbye to you properly on Skype. But in the meantime, everyone, please say thank you to Lee. And it's been great having him back on fourth time. Wow, I didn't realize. But Music and Chat did start in 2020, and it's now, fourth year.
Okay, once a year. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'll see you next year. Okay.
Here's the outro. Thanks, everyone. Viewers, you've been great. Please come back for the next show. In the meantime, stay safe and subscribe if you haven't already to my channel. Thank you.